Alright, welcome to the video everyone. What we're going to be going over in this one is the Precision Knife Sharpener from WorkSharp. What we'll be going over is the different features and pieces you see laid out here on the table of the sharpening system, and then later on we're going to be testing the knife sharpener on one of my knives and seeing if it's actually worth the $50 price tag that it is marked at. Before we get into that though, let's just go over the pieces you see laid out here. So first things first, we have in the middle here the base. So this base is entirely made of plastic. You can see on the top here we have these two tabs. This is what's used to actually mount the sharpening chassis you can see over here on my left side. I mentioned it was made completely out of plastic, but I will say it is a very thick and rigid plastic. You can see here just with my hands there is little to no flex in this base, so that's really nice. And then down on the bottom side here we have these 4 rubber feet to keep this thing from slipping when you're sharpening on a smooth surface. So like I said, on top of this, you're going to put your sharpening chassis. So on the sharpening chassis, this is where all your pieces mount to, and this is where you make all of your adjustments and actually do your sharpening with. So in the center here, we have this circle with this white dot at the top. This is where you're going to mount your knife clamp. You can see on my right. Up here in the middle, we have this sort of carriage here, which actually holds the sharpening rod up above. And this is where you actually are going to be making your adjustments for the angle that you want your edge to be at. Over here on the left side, you can see we have increments between 15 degrees and 30 degrees. That's just going to be the angle of your edge, whichever you desire. So on the left, you can see we have 5-digit jumps, 15, 20, 25, and 30. And then over on the right side, you can see we have single-digit increments between those 5-digit jumps. And to make that adjustment, you just have a little thumb wheel on the top, which rotates this lead screw. And then that's how you make your adjustments there. And then on the right side, you just have another guide rod that's on the other side of this chassis. Behind this, you can see that there is a button back here. So you will actually, while sharpening, depress this and rotate this around, and that's how you get to the other side of your blade, and that's how you're able to sharpen both sides with good precision and accuracy and repeatability. So like I said, going into here is going to be the actual knife clamp. So if we open this up here and we look inside of this thing, you can see that we have some nice big rubber pads. So this is going to offer a little bit of protection to the spine of your blade, and it is also going to add a little bit of friction to help this thing grip onto your knife. So to actually install this, all you're going to do is take the clamp and slip it right on in. So there's actually magnets on the inside and on this clamp, so everything just goes together with magnets, falls into place, and they're fairly strong, so it's not going to be falling out while you're trying to sharpen. The next piece that goes onto this chassis is going to be the actual sharpening device. So this is the rod here, and this is where they have their 3 different sharpening stones that you can go up through and get your desired sharpness. So first things first, you have your rough stone here. This is 320 grit. We can rotate this. Everything locks into place really nice. You have your medium 600 grit. Rotate it one more time. And then you have your high grit ceramic stone for finishing and honing. So if you're going to be doing a really rough blade, or you want to be putting a new edge on your blade, a new angle, you're going to want to start with that 300 or 320, I should say. But if you already have a decently sharp knife, you know what your angle is, go ahead and just start with that 600, and then you can hone it up with your ceramic. And then later on, as you use your knife, if you don't let it get too dull, you can just kind of touch it up with the ceramic and you'll be just fine. So very similar to the clamp, this is held in with a magnet as well. So on the chassis, on the top here, there's a magnet. And then on the sharpening rod, you can see we have that little nub in there. So that actually just slides up inside and clips in with a magnet. Let's pull that off, do that one more time. Just slips in there with a magnet, and it stays in while sharpening. So now that you have the chassis all set up, you're going to mount it all up on the base. You can see on the front of the chassis here, we have that little slot. So that slot is actually going to go into the front tab here. It's just going to slide in. And then on the back side, you have this little spring clamp here. All you're going to do is push down on the chassis, and it is going to lock in place, and this thing is not going anywhere. All right, so we have this thing all set up. What we're going to do is re-angle the camera here. We're going to get this thing set up for sharpening, put the knife in it, and we're going to see how it does. All right, everybody, so we have this thing all set up. We're ready to start sharpening. What we're going to be sharpening with today is this Kershaw Cryo. This is an absolutely amazing knife. It's got some decent steel on it, but I actually purposely rounded over this edge, so we are completely dull right now. We're just going to be doing a simple paper test today, and as you can see, this thing doesn't even scratch paper. Of course it's going to tear it. Anything will tear paper, but this thing will not cut paper. So hopefully by the end of this, after we go through the sharpening process, we'll actually be able to cut some paper and maybe even shave some hair with this thing. So we'll see what we can actually do. So to actually start here, we're going to just load the knife into the clamp. So to do this, we're just going to open it up, set the knife in. We want to try to get this thing somewhat in the center. One thing that you do have to watch out for, though, is you don't want this clamp to be so far out at the tip that you have no clearance between the clamp and the edge, because the sharpening stone will actually start to hit the corners of this clamp if you're too close to your edge. So you want to give it a little bit of clearance. So you want to get it as far away from that edge as possible. On this drop point knife, what I need to do is I need to basically bring it all the way as far back as I can to have as much clearance as possible up by the tip here. So when you load this in, what you want to make sure of is just that you load the spine of the knife all the way down into those grooves that are cut into the sides. And that'll give you that repeatability when you're actually sharpening multiple times with this knife. You want to make sure that the angle is the same every time you sharpen. So loading it all the way back into those grooves is going to give you that repeatability. So we're going to put that in there, tighten this thing down. So you want to make sure that you get this thing super tight. You do not want this knife moving around when you're trying to sharpen, or else you're going to ruin that angle on your edge. So now that we have this thing loaded up, to actually load this, you want to make sure that this white dot here is on the top, and you're going to want to load your handle to the right side. Now this is very important, because when you're actually sharpening with this thing and you start to rotate the knife, the sharpener only rotates in one direction. So we can't actually take this and rotate it down. It goes halfway and then stops. So it's really important that you have that handle to the right side, so that way when you rotate, the handle isn't going to be hitting your table. Now, not a huge deal. You could just lift the sharpener up and rotate it this way, but it just makes it a little bit easier, making sure that dot's on top and your handle's on the right side. Also, if you are a little bit more comfortable this way, you could just remove the entire clamp, rotate the knife, and then reinstall it that way. But that's all personal preference. I like using that button on the back, so that's what I'm going to be doing. So before we actually start sharpening, what you need to make sure is what the edge angle is that you're going for. I'm going to keep the same angle that's on this edge. I believe it's about 20 degrees, but there's a way that we can test that. If not, you can put it at any angle you want, and you can just go through the sharpening process and then basically put a new edge on it. So to actually see what our edge angle is, best way I found to do it is just to use a Sharpie. We're just going to Sharpie a little spot on the edge, take a pass with the sharpening stone, and see where we remove that Sharpie and see where we need to readjust that angle. Let's go ahead and reinstall the knife. Go ahead and put in our sharpening rod, and we're going to rotate this over to the 320, and we're just going to take a single pass on this edge here. Alright, so there you can see that I have completely removed that Sharpie across the entire edge, top to bottom, so we're at the exact right angle. Now if you were removing Sharpie from the very tip of the edge or from the top of the edge, you'll know that your angle's off and you'll need to readjust from there. But we're good at 20 degrees here, and we're just going to go ahead with the sharpening process. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to just take up and down passes all the way up the blade and then all the way back down, and then we're just going to continue that until we can feel a burr on the entire bottom side. Now you'll know what a burr feels like when you feel it. If you've never felt it before, when you're sharpening, feel the top side. You'll feel that it is very smooth and your finger will just roll off the edge of the blade. And then when you feel the bottom side, if there's a burr there, you'll feel your finger sort of catching. You could even try to take a fingernail and feel as well. You'll feel it catch where there's a burr there, and it'll slide off of the top. Alright, so let's go ahead and start sharpening this thing with the 320. Alright, let's feel for that burr. I do feel a slight burr on the bottom edge, but it's not as pronounced as I would like, so I'm going to keep going a little bit more. And one thing you want to make sure of when you're sharpening with these stones is you want to make sure that you're using the entire stone that you have available. You want to be going from all the way to the top, all the way to the bottom. You don't want to be wearing a small spot just in the center of the stone. And a good way to do that is you can actually set these grommets that are available on this sharpening rod to basically essentially set your limits. So we have all the way to the top, and our stone is still on the edge, right at the very edge of it. And then we can bring this all the way down, and we can actually adjust this grommet down a little bit more. And you can see right there we're on the top edge all the way across. We'll bring it up a little bit. It's a little bit close for me. So there we go. On our limits, we are using the entire stone across the entire edge of the blade. Alright, so I can now feel a significant burr on the bottom side of this thing. And we're totally smooth, just rolling right over the top of this edge where we're sharpening. So we're going to go ahead and flip this thing over and repeat that same exact process until we feel a burr on the other side. Alright, so I'm starting to get a burr on this back side. I'm a little bit smooth on the bottom here, so I'm just going to work around there a little bit and try to get a burr over there. Alright, so we have a burr across the entire bottom edge here now. So we've established our edge. Both the edges on both sides have now met each other. So we do have a good meeting point right in the center there. So what we can do now is rotate this thing back over to this side that we have our burr on. We're going to flip to the 600 grit stone, and we're going to start that same process again. So at this point, we've already established our edge. Now we are just sharpening. So we can be a little bit more gentle with it. We don't need to take as many passes. We're just trying to remove the scratches from the previous grit that we put in there, and then we can move on then to the ceramic stone. Alright, so now that I have both edges smooth with that 600 grit, what I'm going to do is just take a couple passes here and I'm going to try to straighten out that blade. I'm just going to try to get rid of that burr so that way we don't have to do as much work with our ceramic stone when we move on to that next. So I'm just going to take some single passes and I'm just going to try to remove that burr and straighten that thing out. Now I'm just taking these single passes because I'm just trying to remove the burr. I'm not actually trying to polish or scratch this blade here. I'm just trying to get that burr off of there. So the burr has now moved to the back side, and I'll just take a couple passes down here. And that seems to be pretty good. So now we're going to flip this thing over, move to our ceramic stone, and we're really going to start polishing and honing in this edge. So I'm going to start doing the same thing, my up and down passes, up and down this blade, and then we'll go to the single passes, and then we're just going to take single passes on either side in between, and we'll get this thing razor sharp hopefully. Now you could essentially spend hours on this process here with this ceramic stone. Really what we're doing is we're just polishing this edge now, and you could sit here for a couple hours and get this thing to look like a mirror if you wanted to. I'm just trying to get this thing to a serviceable edge and see what we can do with it as far as cutting paper and shaving here. Hopefully it'll be sharp, but I'm not going to try to make this thing super polished, but you could if you wanted to. One thing you want to make sure of about that burr on the opposite side is you want to make sure that that burr goes across the entire edge of that blade. If you continue to the other side without making sure there's a burr across the entire edge, you're essentially just going to have dull spots and sharp spots where the edges did not apex together. So you want to make sure that that edge, or that burr, goes across the entirety of the edge. Alright, so that's pretty good. At this point, what we're going to do, we're just going to start taking single passes, just like we did with that 600 grit, and we are going to try to straighten this edge out and get rid of that burr. What I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly lower my passes that I take on either side until we get to a single pass between on both sides, and then we should be good to go. So I've done 5 passes on this side. Now I'll do 5 passes here. And I'll work my way all the way down to 1 pass. Now I'm going to take 1 pass on either side about 3 times, and that'll make sure that that edge is really nice and straight. Because if your edge is not straight and you have the burr on there, you won't be cutting anything. That burr is the biggest thing that you want to make sure of. You do not want a burr on your edge when you are finished with this process. Alright, so I think that's sufficient enough. we've gone through the entire sharpening process. We've polished the blade. It looks pretty good from what I can see right now, and we're going to see how we actually did. So let's go ahead and take this knife out. Let's take a look at it. So you can see I got that edge really nice and shiny. It's not a mirror per se, but I am getting some slight reflections out of it. I mean, this thing is pretty sharp. Let's go ahead and take it out of the clamp. Oh yeah. Yeah, that thing is definitely sharp. I can feel that. That's a nice edge right there. So before we actually start to get out the paper, let's see if we can even shave some hair with this thing. If you look at that, that's hair on there. We can definitely shave hair with this thing. So it's pretty sharp. Let's go ahead and see what we do on the paper. So you remember last time, you can see here we were just kind of crinkling it and tearing it. We weren't able to cut anything. So let's see what we can do. And just like that, we're cutting paper like nobody else. I mean, this is an absolutely sharp knife, and I am really impressed with what we were able to do with this sharpening system, which again, keep in mind, this thing only costs $50. You could get a knife this sharp with just a sharpening stone, but you need a lot of skill to be able to keep an edge or keep an angle on a knife with a stone. And I don't have those skills, but this sharpener here, this system allows me to be able to sharpen a knife to this sharp with little to no effort. One thing I will mention with this system, some of the cons, I should say the only con, would be the weight of it. It is small, it is packable, you can take this thing down, take it anywhere, and sharpen a bunch of different knives with it. But the issue with that is that this base, or the entire system alone, is extremely light. I mean, this thing weighs about nothing. And that's actually a little bit of a problem when sharpening, because you need to hold on to this thing tight and you need to make sure that this thing does not move, or else you're going to be moving this thing all around when you're trying to sharpen if you're not holding on to it. Now what I might do in the future is drill a couple holes in this thing and either mount it to a heavier base. You could fill the base of this thing with concrete or something. I mean, you can make this base heavier. That's not a big deal. But I do wish that it came with a heavier base and it would be a little bit more stable when sharpening. But other than that, I have absolutely zero issues with this thing. I think the adjustments are nice, the features are nice. It obviously does an amazing job. You get good results with it. So I am really impressed with it. But we can make this thing even better. There is something we can do to able to get more grits out of this system than what we have available here, because we only have 3 grits available, 320, 600, and that ceramic stone. But we can increase the grits on this thing, and we can make this thing even sharper, and we can even put lapping pads on here and really lap this blade. So that's going to be for the next video. I'll go into details when we get to that point. But for now, this video, I'm really impressed with this thing, and I think you would be too if you're looking into it. It's only 50 bucks, it's very inexpensive, and I think what you get is really worth the value. So yeah, that's going to be the video, everyone. Thanks for watching.